some hidden rocket science behind it. Simple. Because when we inhale, okay, we inhale a mixture from which only oxygen goes into the blood. Make sense, Devangi? It's the same thing like I gave you a basket full of a mixture of apples, oranges, bananas, pineapples. You only took pineapple and put some more oranges and returned it back. But when you returned that bucket back, will it only have oranges that you returned?
No, sir.
What will it have? It also will have things which was offered to you, but you did not take, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. That's how when we exhale a mixture of gases, because we also, when we inhaled a mixture of gases. So these gases just do not get into the blood. So they just go in and come back, because we have no filter in our nose to just filter out every gas and get oxygen inside. No, that's how. Okay, simple, but yes, intuitive question. Anyone has any other questions?
Question.
Yes, Iram.
I came across this word called thoracic vertebra. Is it like the normal vertebra only, or it's different?
It's the wherever these words like abdominal, thoracic, lumbar, so these talk about the region of the body. I told you what is thoracic, right? Thoracic cavity, the cavity which includes the chest and the heart, right? Thorax region. So our thorax region start below the shoulder, like below the neck, and goes till somewhere mid, like before, above the diaphragm. So the vertebral column that runs from our neck goes into the back of, from our back, that whole vertebral column goes very down till the pelvic bone, towards the last vertebral bone, which is called as coccyx. So the and it is a combination of 33 bones, right? You know that the vertebral column in humans is 33 bones joined together in a chain like manner.
Yes.
From the center of which runs your spinal cord. So the region of the vertebral column that is present in the thorax region is called thoracic vertebra. So all your ribs in the front side are attached to the sternum, and the ribs on the back side are attached to the thoracic vertebra. Okay. When you go beyond that, you will start the abdominal vertebra. Then below that is the lumbar vertebra, where your pelvic bone starts. Okay. And above your shoulders is the cervical vertebra, where your neck is. So sometimes pain in the neck, like the vertebral column which is present in the neck, if you have a pain there because of your bad posture, some people just continuously for hours sit in front of laptops or books in a very, if I could, let me see if I can show my video on. So you understood, like if you just keep your neck stressed for a very long time, looking down in the laptop or the book, a pain starts in the neck, right? And you know that it's on the back side, it's in the vertebral column. So that's called cervical vertebra. It's in that cervical region. Okay.
Yes.
So this is how we named it. Is that doubt clear now?
Yeah.
Very good. Any more doubts? Anything more you want to ask people? If not, then someone has to just quickly give me a recap. A quick recap. So Waziha has joined. Hello, Waziha. How are you? So I realize it's all girl.
Hello,
Gang.
sir.
Hello,
I'm
Waziha.
fine, sir.
Great.
And how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm so happy that you're good and happy. Yeah, so I was just saying that it's all a girl gang class, right? How do you feel? Okay, so anyone quickly would like to volunteer for a summary? So there's a prize associated. The one who will volunteer for a summary will get maybe half a mark extra in their next school exam. If you understood what I mean. You don't have to go through everything, just the concept. Don't be afraid by this figure on the screen. Come on. I have high expectations. So if I'll pick someone, then that person has to give. There's 0.25% chance, like 25% chance, sorry. 0.25 probability. Okay, let's go to Aisha. Aisha, how about you? Giving a quick summary. Just the concepts that we covered. You can skip some details if you want, but not the major ones. This is the moment mostly when students can't hear me, but I hope you are, all of you are able to hear me, correct?
So,
Yes, Iram.
so this is not the chapter.
Is this, oh, we finished this chapter, right? My bad, people, my bad. I'm just surprised that you realized it. Okay, great. Yes, now who will volunteer for a quick summary, since we are on the right chapter? Aisha is not responding. I'll go to Devangi. Devangi?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Great. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Iram. I'm so sorry for, I just didn't pay attention to it. You know, it sometimes happens between batches. Yes, Devangi, over to you.
So breathing is a process of inhalation and exhalation, or simply the exchange of gases. And respiration or cellular respiration is the oxidative breakdown of glucose inside the cells to produce energy.
Yeah.
Then the respiratory organ in humans is lungs, and the medium is atmospheric gas. In lower invertebrates, it is through different mediums. So it happens by diffusion through moist skin, that is cutaneous respiration, through trachea in insects and book gills, and in fish, it is the dissolved oxygen through gills, and it is called branchial respiration. Then human respiratory system, the common opening of mouth and nose is known as pharynx. Then epiglottis is a cartilaginous flap that prevents food from entering the windpipe or larynx. So next is larynx.
So larynx is not, so often we get confused. So larynx is not the windpipe per se. Okay, Devangi. Though, like, I think even some school in the schools, sometimes, you know, this is used very interchangeably. Larynx is that protrusion, like it's a voice box through which wind gushes when we produce sound. So it's also known as sound box or the wind box. Trachea is known as the windpipe. Okay. Esophagus is the food pipe, trachea is the windpipe, larynx and pharynx are openings where, you know, so pharynx is the common opening between the nasal and the oral cavity, and also the common opening between the food pipe and the windpipe. So larynx, uh, from there the windpipe starts. Trachea is known as the windpipe. Is that clear, Devangi?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
So larynx is the voice box.
Voice box. Yes.
Adam's apple.
Yeah, or sound box.
Yes, sir. And then we have trachea. Trachea divides into two bronchi, and tracheal rings are half or C-shaped because it has esophagus behind it that needs space. And trachea and bronchi have rings to sustain the negative air pressure and prevent collapsing during exhalation.
Correct.
Then bronchus diverges into bronchioles, and at the end we have air sac-like structures known as alveoli.
Correct.
Then between the lung and diaphragm, we have pleural membrane, and between lung and pleural membrane, we have pleural fluid that acts as shock absorber.
Yes, another just one more thing I want to add here. It's not just that only between the lungs and the diaphragm you have pleural membrane. You have the pleural membrane all around the lungs. Okay, even between the lung and the ribs, lung and the back body wall. So that pleural fluid gives a cushion to the whole lung itself. Like all our organs have this kind of a fluid around them to give them cushion. Remember, we were discussing this last time.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes, continue.
When diaphragm is in relaxed state, it is dome shaped, and when we inhale, it is under pressure and it becomes flat.
Yeah. So that is called the contracted part. So normally, contractions look disrupted in shape and relaxations look flat. So that's where students often get confused. So remember, the relaxed state is dome shaped for a diaphragm, and the contracted shape is like when it gets flat. So you can just imagine it like a metal which is already a dome shaped. So when you contract it, you make it flat, but again it comes back. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Then mechanism of breathing. Breathing consists of two processes: inspiration, that air from the atmosphere goes into lungs, and expiration, air from lungs goes into atmosphere. So after exhalation and before inhalation begins, intrapulmonary pressure is lower than the atmospheric pressure. So in lungs we have negative pressure. But after inhalation, the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than atmospheric pressure. So pressure in the lungs is positive.
Yes, we call it a positive pressure.
Inspiration leads to contraction of diaphragm, which increases the volume of thoracic cavity. And then we started respiratory capacities or volumes.
Yes. So just a quick summary of did you all go back and take a look at these volumes and capacities to get rid of confusions? Yes, I hope. Yes, Devangi, just quickly go over it.
So the normal respiratory rate is 12 to 15 times per minute. First is tidal volume or TV. It is the volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration. So average we have TV as 500 ml of air, and normally the amount of air inspired or expired per minute is 6,000 to 8,000 milliliters. Second is inspiratory reserve volume, IRV. It is the additional volume of air a person can inhale during a forceful inspiration.
Yes.
It is 2,500 to 3,000 milliliters. Then expiratory reserve volume, ERV, additional volume of air expired during a forceful expiration, that is 1,000 ml to 1,100 ml. Residual volume or RV is the remaining air in lungs even after forceful expiration, and it prevents the lungs from collapsing. Residual volume can be calculated IRV minus ERV.
Yes, so this is one of the neat questions as well, which we saw that which of the following volumes is directly responsible for keeping lungs in the shape, and which means preventing it from collapsing. Both these terms means the same thing. They are asking tidal volume, IRV, ERV, or residual volume. What will you say?
Residual volume.
Yes, great. Now coming to capacities.
Inspiratory capacity IC, it is the total volume of air we can inspire after a normal expiration. It is TV plus IRV, that is 3,000 to 4,000 milliliters. Then expiratory capacity EC, total volume of air we can expire after normal inspiration. It will be TV plus ERV, 1,500 to 1,600 ml. Then functional residual capacity, FRC, volume of air remaining in lungs after normal expiration. And it will be ERV plus RV, that is 2200 to 2400 milliliters. Then vital capacity or VC, it is the maximum volume of air we can breathe in after a forced expiration. We will add ERV, IRV, and TV, or we can say EC plus IRV.
Yeah, because EC is ERV plus TV, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Then total lung capacity, TLC, total volume of air that can be contained in lungs after forceful inspiration, TV plus RV plus ERV plus IRV. Or we can say VC plus RV.
Yes, great. So this is where so these were all the factual, basically fact-driven part of the chapter that we covered last time. Today we are majorly going to focus on the concept of exchange of gases, how these gases are transported. So exchange, their transport, and what are the factors that affect the transportation of the major two gases, or the only two respiratory gases, which is oxygen and CO2. But before I start that, let me give you a concept map. So it's 23rd November. So let's start with the concept map of everything. So we discussed a lot about pressure. So let's figure out what are we going to talk about in the rest of the chapter. So we have two respiratory gases, right? Which is, what are these gases? Oxygen and carbon dioxide. Is that correct? Basically, the whole game is exchanging this with this inside the body, between the lungs and the body, things like that. So we have oxygen and we have CO2. Now, for oxygen, the first thing, if I ask you, what is the pressure? Okay, so we are going to study whenever we study pressure of gases, we just study the partial pressure. Okay, of why do we study partial pressure? In chemistry, you must have studied this. If I take a beaker, which is airtight, and I put 3 gases in the beaker, so all these gases, the molecules of these gases, will be exerting a pressure against the wall of the beaker, correct? Yes or no? Am I audible? I hope I'm audible, right? Yes. Okay, so all these 3 gases will be exerting pressure against the wall of the beaker, but if you talk about gas A, B, and C, all these 3, their individual pressures on the wall that contributes to the whole pressure will be called a partial pressure. Okay, so whether we are talking about in the atmosphere or inside the body, these 2 gases always are present in different concentrations. So hence their partial pressures are studied. So their partial pressure is a readout to tell about their concentration as well. If a gas has more concentration, their partial pressure will be more. Okay, and this is studied in millimeter of Hg, mercury. So you know, how do we measure pressure? Blood pressure. Anyone has seen that blood pressure measuring device?
Yes.
Anyone knows the name of that device? Do you know the name? Device to measure BP, because that is the pressure of the blood. What is it called? It is called sphygmomanometer. Okay, just a very complex name, but what does it have? It has just like So due to pressure, you see an increase in the mercury, right? You know that mm of Hg. So the pressure increases, something keeps going up in that graduation tube, and then where it stops and you see you hear a pulse. So if you see anyone taking blood pressure, they also keep one stethoscope at the in the hand, right, where mostly injections are also given. Yes or no? So what are they hearing? They are hearing for that pressure where they see they hear the heartbeat. So depending on the hearing of the heartbeat, also you can say that this is the and the pressure of blood is always given into a range, the upper and the lower. It's called the upper blood pressure or the lower, diastole, systole. Okay, diastolic blood pressure, systolic blood pressure, it's called. So it's 120 by 80 for a normal human, right? You have studied this. They always write blood pressure like this. Your blood pressure is 120 by 80. Correct? So something like similar we are going to do here. So it is the partial pressure. Okay, now let's talk about oxygen first. And first thing that we are going, let's talk both in parallel. So first thing, both these gases are present in atmosphere. Okay, so just an estimate, an idea. In the atmosphere, you tell me what will be more, oxygen or CO2? What is more in oxygen? What is more in atmosphere? Just by percent.
Oxygen.
Oxygen, there is 21% oxygen and there is only 0.03% CO2. So if you see the partial pressure of oxygen per mm of Hg in any given amount, so if you take 1 liter random air from the atmosphere, you will see that the partial pressure of oxygen will be around 159 to 160 mm of Hg, but for CO2 it will be very less. It will be around 0.3 to 0.4 only. This is not the concentration, this is not the fraction, it is just the mm of Hg partial pressure. This just tells you that there is very less CO2 in the atmosphere. Okay, but now things will change. From atmosphere, where does the oxygen, where does these airs gases go next? Into the lungs, right? And in the lungs, what is the site where the exchange happen? Alveoli. Remember I told you this part, alveoli, the air sacs at the very end terminal of the lung. So what do you think here the pressure will be? Because remember here, CO2 is not just coming from the atmosphere, CO2 is also being sent by the blood. Remember, CO2 from the blood is also coming back into the alveoli. And in alveoli, there is small amount, in every alveoli, there is small amount of air present. So in alveoli, before exchange, like during that exchange, oxygen is around 104 mm of Hg pressure. So this drop in pressure you see because oxygen is absorbed and CO2 drastically comes up to around 40 to 45. So 40 mm of Hg, 0.4 to 40. How many times? Almost 100 times more CO2 is flushed back into our lungs from our body. That's the difference. And that's why if you see these partial pressures in blood, from lungs it goes into blood. Now blood is of two types, oxygenated and deoxygenated. Let's first talk about oxygenated one, which gets oxygenated from the lungs. So oxygenated one will have the level somewhere around higher, somewhere around what is present in the alveoli. So it's around 95 to 98 or 100 sometimes. So 95 mm of Hg of oxygenated, because it's oxygenated, it has more oxygen, it makes sense. And there will be 40 mm of Hg. Now you don't see a change here, much of it. Why? Why don't you see a change here? Think about it while I'm writing for deoxygenated. That will give you some hint. You expect that when does a blood gets deoxygenated? When it reaches each and every tissue of the body, and this amount which is available starts getting used up. So in a deoxygenated, this is 40, and this a little bit increased to 45, but it never goes beyond 45, because beyond 45 or 50 mm of Hg, the CO2 toxicity starts in the body. So this is in the blood. The last place it is present in the tissues. So inside a tissue, always what has to be more? CO2 has to be more, because oxygen is getting used up very fast. So a deoxygenated blood, the partial pressures which are present in the deoxygenated blood is also the same partial pressure which is in the tissues, because inside the tissues blood get deoxygenated. So you will see a trend here. Oxygenated blood is like pressures in the lung, like alveoli, and deoxygenated blood resemble like tissues. Yes or no? Do you agree, everyone?
Yes, sir.
So that's the reason. Okay. Is this part clear? Is there any doubt in this part? Please write this down. Okay, guys, I can see Yusuf has also joined. Hello, Yusuf, how are you? Sorry, I saw you joining, but I could not greet you before. Am I audible, Yusuf? I think you're not connected to the audio or what? Okay. Anyways, but everyone has noted this down. Does this make sense to you? All of you? Great. Now pay attention to this point. You see that at one given point of time, which is in our deoxygenated blood, and also in the tissues in general, because tissues are very fast, they are depleting and exhausting, utilizing all the oxygen to break down glucose. So here you see that the pressure of CO2 is more than the pressure of oxygen itself, correct? Yes or no? Which simply means that there is more CO2 than the oxygen. And in tissues, of course, we can understand, but in the blood, if there is more CO2 than oxygen, then how will it be transported also drastically changes. Okay, so normally what we have studied about the transportation of gases is that you must have learned in your junior classes that hemoglobin is responsible for transporting oxygen, correct? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And Do you also know that hemoglobin is also responsible for the transportation of CO2, but not to a major extent? So CO2 has many ways through which it can be transported, but oxygen mostly has a couple of ways, out of which hemoglobin binding through hemoglobin is the major way. So the next and the most important part of this chapter, which is the most conceptual part of the chapter and also the last part of the chapter, is transport of these gases. But before that, let me go back to one concept, which is what happens in alveoli. So let's make an alveoli. Let's, for an example, this is a bigger picture of an alveoli. Let's say this is an alveoli, which is the bag. Okay, it is it is so thin that this is just one cell thick membrane. Okay, it is a single cell layer thick membrane. Okay, and around every, so let me mark what is it. It is a alveoli. Around every alveoli there is a blood vessel. I'm so sorry, I'm bad at it. There's a blood vessel that, okay, one last time we'll try. Okay, let's go from top. So there's a blood vessel that very closely passes. Now this is a very small blood vessel. Okay, so this is called a capillary. Okay, pulmonary capillary. It's present in the lungs. Now this capillary also is single cell layer thick. Okay, so how many cells are there? If we talk about this layer, there is one single cell here, right? And there is one single cell here, right? So whenever two cells are present in close proximity, and also tell me the partial pressure. So can you tell me the partial pressure of O2 here and partial pressure of CO2 here from the table above? Aisha, Devangi, Iram?
104 and 40.
Yes, 104 and 40 mm of Hg and mm of Hg. Remember that. This is the unit, very important. Now tell me in the lungs, for the lungs we'll write here. What is the PO2 and PCO2? Sorry, in the capillary. Now, let's say what kind of blood will be present in the capillary that will come to, let me divide it at, so from here onwards, the blood that will go will be oxygenated, right? But here, before that, the blood which is present here will be deoxygenated. So what we are going to take for exchange purposes is the deoxygenated blood's composition. Now tell me. So I will remove this oxygenated mark, otherwise you will be confused. So what is the partial pressure of O2 and CO2 in deoxygenated blood? 40 and 45. Now, you have studied in chemistry, I'm sure, that whenever there are two membranes very closely present, yes, then transport can happen through them by just diffusion, correct? Things can diffuse across the plasma membrane, at least one single membrane, just by diffusion, correct? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So the same happens there. Exchange of gases through diffusion. Okay, so tell me what will go from capillary to the alveoli, which is higher in pressure. So it is 40 mm of Hg here and 45. So what will go? CO2 will go from the capillaries to the capillary to alveoli, right? You can also write from blood to lungs. And O2 will go from alveoli to capillary. There's no other logic, it's simple diffusion. But tell me, what will go more? Where do you find the more difference in concentration? CO2 or O2?
O2.
O2. That's why more of oxygen is like more means when oxygen will come into the deoxygenated blood from 40, this level will go how much up till 95, correct? Okay. So from 40, it will go till 95 because lots of oxygen will come in. But from 45, how much low will this go? From 45, how much low will this go in oxygenated blood? Just 40. So you see, this change is not that much, right? But this change is a lot, correct? If this question comes, you can just understand because the difference in the partial pressures between the oxygen and the CO2 is also very different between the alveoli and the capillaries. Is that correct? Do you understand the concept, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So please draw this quickly. Draw this and I'll be back in a minute. Just need to get water. Let me know when you're done. Just write in the chat. Okay, so Devangi is done. Others? Is it done? Okay. Now, one question that has come in NEET is this single cell layer thick membrane of alveoli is made up of what kind of cells? So it is the simplest of the cells, which is called squamous epithelial cells. Squamous epithelium. These are square, simple cells. And this one is made up of it's a single layer again. This is also squamous in nature, but we call it endothelium because it's a layer, but it is inside. Okay, but it's also squamous in nature. but endothelium. Okay, just know this. Is this done, people? Please write in the chat if you cannot speak so that I know that I should move ahead. I'm waiting for Aisha and Jania. Iram and Devangi are done. What about Aisha and Jania? Jania is done. Aisha, should I move forward?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So next, let's come to how inside the cell, like inside the body, how the physiological transport of these gases takes place. So we are going to go into the transport of respiratory gases. Okay. Now first let's talk about oxygen. First is, now for the transport of oxygen, there are, so blood, you know that blood is a liquid tissue, correct? So oxygen can be transported in 3 ways. One, just like any gas can transport, like in a dissolved state, right? So gases can dissolve in liquid, you know that. And what is the liquid of the blood known as, like what is the medium of the blood, the basal medium? It's called plasma, right? So one way is it can be transported as a dissolved state in plasma. Okay, and this only happens for around 3% of the oxygen. Okay. Around 3% of oxygen which is present in our system moves in a dissolved form in the plasma. The major of which is around rest 97%, okay, is transported by RBCs, where the oxygen bind to hemoglobin. So bound state to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is present on the RBC surface. So that's around the rest 97%. Is that clear, everyone? Oxygen transport. So you see that this molecule, hemoglobin, is the most important, displaying the most crucial part here in the transportation of RBC. So when hemoglobin, what do we know already about hemoglobin? What is hemoglobin? Anyone quickly? It's a red colored pigment. It contains iron, so it has an iron core. Okay, and it's a tetrameric protein. It has 4 monomers, 4 chains together make hemoglobin. Okay, so it's a big complex molecule. So it has 4 chains. Okay, 2 are called alpha chains alpha chain of hemoglobin, and 2 are called beta chains of hemoglobin. So these are the chains. So they kind of join like, this is just a representation to make a hemoglobin. They kind of join like this, and in the center, which I'm making it red, is the iron molecule, is the iron core. Okay, that's how something hemoglobin can be represented like. So hemoglobin is very important. Okay, now when oxygen is bound to hemoglobin, okay, so this is known as oxyhemoglobin. It is specifically called as oxyhemoglobin. Make sense? Is that clear?
Yeah.
And how many chains do you see here? 4, right? So each hemoglobin molecule can carry at the maximum of 4 molecules of oxygen. So this chain can bind to O2, this chain can bind to O2, this chain can bind to O2, this chain can bind to O2. Okay? It's exactly not at this end of the chain, it's somewhere around the core, but I'm just again representing, for the sake of representation, I'm telling you that 4 oxygen molecules can be carried by 1 hemoglobin, correct? Maximum, that's the maximum capacity of hemoglobin to carry oxygen. Okay, now this oxyhemoglobin is, the formation of this oxyhemoglobin is dependent on the partial pressure of oxygen. Write down. Formation of oxyhemoglobin depends on the partial pressure of oxygen. If it is high, then only it will be formed. If it is low, the tendency of forming oxyhemoglobin will go down. This proves that this binding itself, it's reversible. So in chemistry, you must have learned about reversible binding and irreversible binding, right? Yes, no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, so it is a reversible binding. If there is the partial pressure of oxygen is high, this binding will happen. If the partial pressure is low, this binding will like remove. So it will not happen, or where you need to dump oxygen because their partial pressure is low somewhere, then you can remove this oxygen. Now for hemoglobin also, let me tell you one more thing, just write it somewhere. So the binding affinity with hemoglobin is also known as HB written, okay? So the highest affinity is of, which has the highest affinity to bind? CO, carbon monoxide, then oxygen, and then CO2. Remember this sequence. CO2 has the least binding affinity. That's why whenever you give a choice between oxygen and CO2, this will win. And that's how we live. That's how we are very happy with this situation. But have you heard or read about cases where people who get trapped in a car, or people who sleep in their cars with the ACs, air conditioners on, or people who sleep in houses with something like, earlier there used to be, to warm the room, coal used to be burned, right? in a metallic container, you can burn coal and keep it in the room, so that will radiate heat. But apart from heat, that will also do one thing. It will exhaust all the oxygen in the room, and since it is not completely burning, it will not after the lack of oxygen, CO2 will not be formed. Instead, CO will be formed. When oxygen is limited, CO2, instead of CO2, CO starts forming, and this CO is called carbon monoxide. Just like this is carbon dioxide, there are two oxygen. This is called monoxide because there is only one oxygen. And this is a toxic gas. It is toxic because it kills people in sleep without any feeling of pain or something. You will just die. The brain will die in sleep because this binds with hemoglobin in a reversible manner, and slowly the brain gets deficient of oxygen and stops working. First becomes, you are already sleeping, so you are subconscious. Then the brain goes unconscious into a coma-like state and finally dies because of no oxygen at all. Okay? So it's a toxic. So never sleep in a room which is closed with anything burning in it. Okay? Do you understand, everyone? Make sense? Okay. Now coming back to oxyhemoglobin. So to study the properties of oxyhemoglobin, one thing that we have to study is, it's called oxygen dissociation curve. Okay. Oxygen dissociation curve, ODC. Questions come on this a lot. Draw an oxygen dissociation curve and explain it. So what is oxygen dissociation curve? It is a graph basically, okay, which has a y-axis, just like every graph, and an x-axis. Now y-axis is the percent saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. So let's say you have 100 molecules of hemoglobin. So maximum, how many molecules of oxygen can a person carry who has 100 molecules of hemoglobin? Quickly. Devangi, Iram, Chania. If you have 100 molecules of hemoglobin, how many maximum molecules of oxygen you can carry? O2.
400.
400. Perfect. So if a person with 100 hemoglobin molecules have 400 oxygen molecules, then we say that the hemoglobin is 100% saturated with oxygen. Is it clear? So write down, on y-axis is the percent saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. Okay. So of course the scale will go, maximum can be 100 and least can be 0. Let's say in the middle somewhere is 50, then 75, 25, etc. Is that clear? Okay, great. And on this x-axis, what should be there on the x-axis then? It is dependent, the binding is dependent on partial pressure of oxygen. So this will be on the x-axis. Okay. Partial pressure of oxygen. And this will be in mm per Hg. This will be the unit. That's correct. So the partial pressure will, how much can it go for? It will also start with 0. The partial pressure can maximum be 100, where it is the only pressure, so it is the full pressure. If you are saying 100% partial pressure, which means there's only one gas, okay, and that is only present. So that's why its partial pressure is 100. So it's sorry, this is not percent, so I'm wrong. So the partial pressure can go till whatever the pressure, okay, not sorry, so this is not percentage based. So this is absolute units, so it can go beyond 100 as well. My mistake. So let's take within this range, or let's take a range above, but I don't think it we will need above 100, but just because so you are not confused, take 150 as well. Great. So let's make a graph. So now you will tell me, if I start with very low oxygen, very low partial pressure of oxygen, what will happen to the percent saturation? When there is no oxygen, there is no hemoglobin bound to oxygen, correct? Yes or no? As
Yes.
as we increase the number, we'll first see, because all the hemoglobins are free, let's say they are ready to just bind to oxygen. So even a slight increase in partial pressure will lead to increase in the binding pressure, increase in the percent saturation as well. So by the time you are reaching, we're going like this. Now let me make it a little better. So it will start like this, it will go like this. Okay. So let's see, let's say we reach somewhere around here, so which is around 60%, let's say 50, 60 is here. Okay, which is somewhere here. So 60% of hemoglobin, or more than 50% of hemoglobin, is already bound when the partial pressure is still around, let's say 35 mm of Hg. But what happens after that is, the next half is not going to be very easy. So now as we increase the partial pressure, you will see that it's not increasing as such. Okay. And after one point of time, because hemoglobin is a limiting factor, after one point of time, all the hemoglobin is bound, 100% saturation has happened, hemoglobin is free. After that, does not matter how much do you keep increasing the partial pressure of oxygen, there will be no increase in the percent saturation of hemoglobin. Is that clear? Does that make sense, people? Yeah, correct. Now this kind of graph, you must be seeing that it's like it's making a S kind of shape, right? It's called sigmoid curve, very classical curve, and well, it has a S shape, so it's called a sigmoid curve. Will you remember this? So oxygen
Yes.
dissociation curve is a sigmoid curve. Draw this quickly. So you see that the first 60% here, for the first 60%, even at very low pressure, 60% of hemoglobin got saturated. But for the rest, 35% or 40%, you see it took a lot. You reach around 100, let's say. So in the first 35, you reach 60%, but to saturate the rest 40%, you have to go around 65%. So that's the difference. Okay. Please draw this. This is called oxygen dissociation curve. So I'll also tell you what to write. Or you can tell me to write. So when you're done, please write in the chat that you're done. Done, people? Okay. Devangi and Niraman. Yes, Chani is also done. Great. So if this curve is clear, let me tell you how this curve is achieved and what are the reason. What is the reason for this disparity that you see? Why is this so big just to achieve a small number of hemoglobin saturation? Now, so write down next factors affecting O2 transport. And the first factor is the opposite, like the enemy. Okay, if you are, as I told you already, if hemoglobin can bind both to oxygen and also to carbon dioxide, so 97% oxygen is in bound state with hemoglobin, and I told you that for carbon dioxide the number is not that significant, but still it is around 25% to 30%, or 20 to 25%. So even 1/4 of the CO2 is can be transported as in a bound state. It's quite significant. So the first factor that affects O2 transport is the partial pressure of CO2. Partial pressure of CO2, because obviously that is going to compete. If CO2's pressure somehow is very high, it will compete with O2's pressure. Correct? Partial pressure of CO2. And where do you see high partial pressure of CO2 than oxygen? There's only one place where it happens. That's why I asked you to mark. Can you tell me where it happens? In the tissue or in a deoxygenated blood. So that's why inside tissues or in a deoxygenated blood, blood is where hemoglobin is present. So in a deoxygenated blood, what will be bound to hemoglobin more and what will be bound to hemoglobin less? It will be opposite now. O2 will not be able to bind to hemoglobin because its partial pressure is less than CO2 and more CO2 will be bound to hemoglobin. Correct, people? Second pressure is pH. Okay. Now, can I say pH as H plus concentration, because wherever there is more H plus concentration. Okay. So write down. If the H plus concentration is less, it favors oxygen binding to hemoglobin. Okay. So lower H plus concentration. Here also lower PCO2 favors the formation of oxyhemoglobin. Okay. Similarly, lower H plus concentration favors the formation of oxyhemoglobin. The third factor is temperature. Okay. And about temperature also, lower temperature favors the formation of oxyhemoglobin. So all these three has to be low so that oxygen can bind readily with hemoglobin. And all these factors are low in alveoli. Okay. So alveoli has lower temperature. Let me now use this thing. Alveoli has lower temperature. It also has low H plus concentration and it also has low PCO2. Am I correct? Partial pressure of CO2. That's why in alveoli we have lots and lots of formation. Like when it comes into the blood, the formation of oxyhemoglobin takes place in the capillaries around the alveoli. Is this clear, everyone? Make sense?
Yes, sir.
And the exact opposite situation happens in tissues. Inside a tissue, pH is more acidic, so more H plus ions are present because there are more wastes being generated. Partial pressure of CO2 is very high, and temperature is also high because energy is being generated in the tissues through respiration, and tissues are constantly working, contracting, relaxing if they are muscles. If there are organ tissues, there also energy utilization is taking place. So you can write down in tissues, write down in tissues high PCO2, high PCO2. So let me write it here. So in tissues has high temperature, sorry. High temperature, high H plus concentration, and also high PCO2. So in the tissues, dissociation of oxygen from hemoglobin takes place. So hemoglobin leaves all the oxygen, not all, but hemoglobin leaves oxygen readily into the tissues, because these conditions do not allow the formation of oxyhemoglobin. So they allow the dissociation of oxyhemoglobin, and they are present in tissues. Now, do you realize why when the hemoglobin goes in the tissues, it gives the oxygen to the cells? Okay. Is this clear, everyone? Please write. Yeah. Please note this down and write in the chat when you are done. Okay, very well. So everyone is done. Cool. So similarly, on similar grounds, we also have to do for oxygen. So we started with, sorry, CO2. So second is carbon dioxide transportation. Okay. Now, first thing that you have to know that carbon dioxide also have two ways by which it can be transported. One is just like oxygen in a dissolved state in plasma. Okay, because it's a gas, it can dissolve in the plasma. Correct? Rest. Okay, so about this. So how what percentage is dissolved in plasma? Any idea? Around 7 to 8%. So I'm just writing 7%, let's say, is dissolved in plasma. Here also you see that both the gases, oxygen was 3%, CO2 is 7%. So you must be thinking the second way is in a bound state, right? Bound state with hemoglobin. But it happened to be that only around 20 to 25 at max, sometimes 26%, 28%. This is the basic range. Is bound to hemoglobin. But still, you have how much? If you just what do you say? Round it up. This is just around 30 to 33%, right? Yes or no? Just 30 to 32% only. So where is the rest 70%? So CO2 is very good in one more mode of transportation. So 70% of the CO2 is transported as bicarbonate. The blood. You know what is bicarbonate? HCO3 minus. This is called bicarbonate. Okay. And this is around 70%. So this is the major form by which it is transported in the body. Do you understand, everyone? Yes, no? Great. Now, if it is dissolved in plasma, then it's dissolved in plasma as a CO2 gas. Okay, that is not. Let's talk about these two things. So when it is in bound state with oxygen, so CO2 plus hemoglobin. This is known as, just like it was called oxyhemoglobin, here we call it carbaminohemoglobin. Carbaminohemoglobin. Okay, the bound state. And this has exactly the same conditions required, which was opposite. So if tissue has, so if there is temperature is high, H plus concentration is high, and PCO2 is high, we know that O2 dissociates, and what is formed? What is formed? So this is also a reversible binding, by the way. So just know that this is reversible binding. And just like formation of oxyhemoglobin, it is dependent on partial pressure of CO2. And where is partial pressure of CO2 high? Inside the tissues. So what will be the factors that will affect this formation? The same factors that were affecting oxyhemoglobin formation. So this formation requires high PCO2, or you can say low O2, correct, which is present in tissues. Second, it requires high or low temperature for its binding. High temperature. And it requires high H plus concentration. Okay. Is that clear, everyone? So this is exactly opposite of oxyhemoglobin formation. So that's why these factors are present in tissue. So in tissue, this is in the tissues, carbaminohemoglobin is formed. And where it will be dissociated? In the alveoli, just the opposite. So this is the chemistry behind this. But that is just 25%. The most important thing is the 75, around 70% of CO2 that is transported, and that is transported through as a bicarbonate ion. So for that, RBCs contain an enzyme. Okay, I'll just take 2, 3, 4 minutes more to explain you this thing. So RBCs contain, this is for bicarbonate ion mode. So RBC contains a very high amount of an enzyme which is known as carbonic anhydrase. Carbonic anhydrase, and the name at the end is ase, so you know that it is an enzyme. Okay, so what does carbonic anhydrase do? It facilitates a reaction, okay, which is a reversible reaction. So this enzyme helps in taking CO2, which is present inside, like which is available, and take water, which is again present in our body. Okay, so that's why water, drinking water is also important, so that you can get rid of a lot of CO2 from your body in the form of bicarbonate. And it can give rise to a reaction which can happen in both the ways. Okay, if you are low on water, then bicarbonate can also broken down by the same enzyme, which is carbonic anhydrase. Carbonic anhydrase. So this enzyme helps in the creation of H2CO3 first, and then in the second step, it's a two-step process, the same enzyme does this. It forms HCO3 negative plus H plus. Okay, and this H plus, this is happening in the tissue, so this H plus also keeps the tissue H plus concentration high, so that oxygen should not bind to hemoglobin now. So sometimes in the books you will see this is directly shown to be forming this, which is also correct, but in between there is this intermediate form, so you should just know it. Okay, some books just directly say, because it's the same enzyme, it's a two-step process. So this reaction takes place. Okay, is this clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes, just remember this is what carbonic anhydrase does. Okay, so this is how 70% of CO2 is transported in our body. So when it, and the moment this carbonic anhydrase, the moment this HCO3 negative reaches the alveoli in a deoxygenated blood, what happens? So the direction goes this way in tissues. Okay, and the same direction goes this ways in alveoli. So just think of carbonic anhydrase as a loader and deloader. So at place A, it loads things, then at place B, it does the opposite to unload things, just like a loader and a deloader. Is this clear, all of you?
Yes.
Yeah. So in this chapter, there's one small paragraph which I'm giving you as a homework. So please write down a homework that you have to read. If there are any doubts, I'll do it in the next class. We'll solve it in the next class if there are any doubts, or else. So there are two things that you have to study. One will be the I think the CNS regulation. Okay, the CNS regulation of respiration. So in our brain, there are respiratory centers, respiratory rhythm. Okay, this is a small paragraph. And second is respiratory disorders. This you have to do at the end of every human physiology chapter. Some disorders that are associated with respiration, which is asthma, emphysema, or some other disorders. So there are 2 or 3 or 4 disorders mentioned at the end of your NCERT. Just read it. It's just 1 or 2 lines, not more. But this is very important. Okay, this I'm relying on you. Will you be able to do it, people?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So